Going back and watching old comedy films can be very tricky because maybe you watched them as a kid and you thought they were hilarious, but in 2021 and beyond, maybe they're not politically correct, or maybe they just feel cringy because the comedy was a testament of its time. We actually talked about that way back in our first review of the Austin Powers movie, the very first one, and we thought that one still held up, right? But then we watched the second one, and it's like it's Austin Powers, but we felt like it was a parody in itself. But now, going over to 2002 with the final movie in the trilogy, Austin Powers Goldmember, some people say it's maybe just as good as some of the other ones. Other people think maybe this is the reason why we didn't keep seeing these. So is Austin Powers Goldmember a pretty good film? Not only will we be talking about this, once we are completed with this first part, we'll actually be talking about the whole trilogy and figuring out, is the Austin Powers movies overrated, or which is the best film? We'll be talking about all of this on a new episode of A Cast of the Past, with a brand new episode available on podcast apps every single Sunday. Clips available across our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/acastofthepast. Joining me, because my name is Juan. I am a person that can barely even get by this intro because the damn movie is just freaking amazing.
We're on 9 minutes and 28 seconds, folks.
Exactly. We tried, people. But another person, some people say he is shagadelic, baby. From Boston, Massachusetts, we have Ryan Mcnulty. Now, Ryan, in your case, did you watch this film when it came out in 2002?
I did. I saw it in theaters, I think for my birthday party. That was the thing. We're all going to get some pizza and then go out and watch Goldmember. So, yeah, that was the time. And I had not seen that movie since until just recently for this podcast.
Ooh, nice. I like that, though, because it's whenever you watch a movie and it's like from release to over 15 years, right? It can be very different there. Now, in your case, Keith Hamilton from London, Ontario.
Nowhere near as shagadelic as Ryan Mcnulty.
No, you're cool though. You're kind of gold.
I do all right. I have my lane, you know.
What'd you think about this film way back when it first came out?
Yeah, this was one that I saw in the theaters as well. We're hitting that point in 2001 where I'm starting to be old enough to actually consume this movie and not have to feel like, oh, my parents are terrible because of it. So I went out to see this in the theater. I really enjoyed it back then, very much so. Not as much as the second one, but it had its merit. Kind of like me, it had its own lane. And then I've seen it a couple of times since, but it definitely didn't have the rewatchability that the other two had for me. It kind of Austin Powers has hit its mark at that point.
Yeah, and for everybody watching and listening, we really want to get your feedback. So if you haven't, consider joining our Discord over at acastofthepast.com/Discord. You can also find us on Twitter by just searching our name, A Cast of the Past. And for this first part, let's just, I'm going to say something, okay? It's very rare that I'm the first one to talk about a film, but I felt like going into this, and I'm talking about the trilogy as a whole, we thought that this was maybe objectively or subjectively the worst one. I think that's how many of us saw it back then, right?
Agreed.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I'm going to say now it's maybe my favorite now. And
wow.
I don't know if that's a statement.
That's a strong statement.
That is an opinion.
I was not expecting that.
I knew you were not expecting that. And in your case, because when you watched the second one back in the day, you had mentioned in the previous episode you thought it was pretty good, but then when we watched it for review, you didn't think it was as good. Can you remember why sometimes that can happen with a comedy film like this?
Well, especially in the genre of comedy, it's 100% the fact that as you get older, your tastes change, right? Humor is subjective, and 10-year-old me versus 30-year-old me, they're gonna expect jokes and take to jokes a little differently, right? So I loved the humor of Austin Powers 2 way more than I do now back when I saw this movie originally, and that's why I watched it so much as a kid. And going back now, I agree with you to a point where after watching these movies, Goldmember I think is better than the second one, but not as good as the first one. Like that would be my ranking on like a macro scale, but it's better. Like I enjoyed this more. It's kind of like a middle ground, you know?
Yeah, because for me, when I watched this, the thing we really bagged on the second film a lot is that it was way too much of the same thing. It was the first film, but more, but not new. It was just they cranked up the volume and it just became distorted. With this one, I think they became self-aware, like, okay, we were too much into the joke. And I think for me, they pulled it back a little bit. They let every character just kind of like play itself out. And I had mentioned that I love Scott in the second one, but they used him too little. I feel like here they did a pretty good job. We'll talk about like the amazing, I don't even know like how expensive the damn intro in the film was, but we'll talk about that. But I found myself just maybe not laughing as much as the first movie, but I think I enjoyed the ride a lot more. Whereas with the second one, many times I found myself going like, oh man, this doesn't hold up. Where I feel like this one, 2002, it maybe holds the test of time better. In your case, Ryan, what you think of it?
I guess I'm just living in a different worlds, because this one to me is just by far the worst one. Like,
really?
It just, yeah, I think, at the second one, it definitely retreads a lot of the tropes of the first one. But I mean, this borrows a lot from the second movie. It feels so played out at this point. Like, I don't know any other way to say it other than this movie feels like a circle jerk. Like, we're just, we're living off of the success of everything else. Like, I don't know. I feel all the characters that were previous, like Dr. Evil and Austin, they've gotten so absurd by this point. I feel like, Beyonce in this movie, granted, I know this is probably like her first movie that she was ever in, but she really adds absolutely nothing to this movie. Her lines are so like they didn't give her anything to work with. I know she's probably new to acting at this point in time, but she was very, very bland. And then it's like Mike Myers, I think he jumped the shark with playing way too many characters, trying to fit it, like trying to, no pun intended, squeeze in Fat Bastard, trying to put in like this new character, Goldmember, it just didn't work for me. Goldmember as a character just felt like a step too far. It felt like he felt compelled to add another character that I feel like didn't add anything. It was really like they were trying to go out with a bang, but I think it just ended up being this complete jumbled mess.
See, now, even though our opinions are different, I can see where you're coming from and do kind of agree. And that's the reason why I like this movie a little more. It is a little quote unquote circle jerky in the way that they understand they're in on the joke now. They did pull it back from the second one, and that makes me appreciate it more because you're not just throwing the joke darts at the joke dartboard and seeing what lands and seeing what sticks. You know that you're this silly thing, and you know that you're this ridiculous over the top thing that has gotten way bigger than it probably had any right of being back in the early 2000s. And they leaned into it, and I think they leaned into it in a fun way. It wasn't the smart comedy of the first one, but it was kind of its own thing now. It was a self-aware version of the dumb comedy. By the way, I just want to take a moment to say, and I love that we're going to go into this a lot this episode probably, but I think this is the first time in the podcast where we have like vastly different opinions about the movie, and I love that so much.
We talked about like 6 Terminator films, and Austin Powers is the one to
well,
do
I mean,
it. But
Terminator is pretty clear. I
Yeah.
think,
Is it
I
pretty
think
clear?
pretty
That's
much
true.
the entire world is in agreement with Terminator. So I think maybe Genesis is the only thing where we felt differently than most people. But I would say, like, I think in the second movie we talked about how you felt like they wrote the joke and then tried to like build the movie around it.
Yeah.
I felt like this movie was even worse with a lot of those things. Like the fact like Dr. Evil going to the regular prison just so that they could do that that number. You know what I mean? The music, the next music video and everything. So he could like, I just hate Dr. Evil in this movie. I think he was such a genius like character
he's
in the
evil.
first. Yeah. I just thought he was such a genius character who like was silly at the right moments, but was trying to like play it straight and was just terrible at what he did. And then the second movie, he gets more ridiculous. But by this movie, he's like just a clown. And it's, you know what I mean? He's basically just a parody of himself. You know what I mean? By this point.
I think what I enjoyed about this movie, and I don't think a lot of people think about it. Okay, so the first Austin Powers movie is just a straight up James Bond parody, right? Like that is the checkbox. I think the reason that a lot of us now didn't quite enjoy the second one is that what happens when you already did the joke, right? You only did more of it, so it comes off less than. To me, it's no surprise that I enjoyed this in the same way that around this time, the scary movie films were definitely picking up steam. And I think this removes itself from a James Bond parody and it moves itself into a movie parody because you even get some Harry Potter stuff. I mean, let's talk about the very beginning of the movie. The very beginning, I think its purpose was to establish like, hey, I know, like we are in this joke. Like freaking Tom Cruise, even if it's like a cameo appearance, like Tom Cruise in 2002, okay? That's pretty damn big.
We're riding high on Mission Impossible.
Exactly. You have Quincy Jones. You have Gwyneth Paltrow before things changed. You have Kevin Spacey before things changed. You have a Jared from Subway commercial reference before.
You have Steven Spielberg showing up.
Exactly. I think it lets you know, like, hey, Hollywood. This is a celebration of a newly established character. I don't think the goal was to parody James Bond. I think it's like, let's just have some fun with this character and have some different references. I mean, the movie technically is a movie about Austin Powers, right? Like the way that they set it up from beginning to end is we're not watching the third Austin Powers adventure. It's like he's seeing his own film and they're kind of doing some things. And I think that for me is the way, like a little bit of like the concern that we have with the second one where you're just doing more of it. I don't know if does that scary movie comparison make a little bit more sense, or am I just talking mumbo?
Yeah, I had never really thought about it until you said that, but it makes total sense where it's almost like they're making a scary movie or like not another teen movie version of the first Austin Powers, where they take the rough premise of a movie of that genre and then just go over the top parody with it. So I think that's actually a really good comparison.
You got Britney Spears in this.
Yeah,
for crying out loud.
That felt cringy to me, honestly. That was part of like the whole like circle jerk part of it. Like I think the intro with like Tom Cruise and everything, I liked that. And Danny DeVito as Mini-Me was amazing. I thought like
I wanted to see so much more of that. Like the Danny,
like the joke kind of stops there, but then when it's kind of like, oh hey, look, we got Britney Spears, we got this cameo, that cameo, that's where it kind of was a little bit too much. I don't know. At the end of the day, I think that just the jokes in the second movie landed more for me than they landed in this movie. Like at this point, it just felt like we were, I get it. They tried to do something a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it was still Austin Powers trying to catch Dr. Evil, which is the same thing. And like this movie basically has no plot.
Yeah, because
it really is.
Because when you think about it, the whole plot is, bitter friends become necessary, bitter enemies become necessary friends or allies, right? Because it's like, oh, Dr. Evil, he's finally caught up, he's finally like in jail, but then he's also the only one that can really help solve some things, to identify where Goldmember is, and they got to travel through time and all that stuff. But then, as you mentioned, they get him to a better prison facility, or technically like a normal one. And yeah, it is like a one-off or something, right? And I think that's, I don't know, and maybe we can look up some fun facts or something. I kind of get the feeling that they knew this was the last film. I think it's very rare when you look at something that you're like, yeah, this is probably the last one, like on purpose. And they just want to like throw everything out there because where do you go like after that intro? Once again, we have like Tom Cruise, Britney Spears, and once again like 2002. I mean, this is a pretty freaking big deal. Quincy Jones, and then so much of this film is like a nice celebration. Like you got number 2 there for a little bit, but then you got number 3, which is the mole, which is a guy that literally has a mole and is a mole, right? You have Mini-Me, who throughout the film, I mean, this is a spoiler, people, for a film that came out in 2002, right? Mini-Me goes from the bad guy to becoming many powers, basically. And then towards the end of the film, we get to see everything kind of like come together where, oh my goodness, you know, Austin Powers and Dr. Evil are actually freaking brothers. And you even get flashback scenes, which I think flashback scenes, you know, this is before like Family Guy became Family Guy, right? But I think this movie kind of brought up a lot of these stuff that we would come to see years later where, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we saw these two characters as kids and how they would react? And they did a lot of that, and I think they did that pretty well. And even though, like, and I'm not saying this to change your opinion, Ron. I'm just saying, I'm expressing my opinion. But what did you think about the way that the film unfolded where they tried to go a lot deeper into like the story between Dr. Evil and Austin Powers, which we hadn't seen?
Just felt really thrown in so that they could have that ending. Like there was no, it really wasn't.
You hated this film, didn't you? You hated this film.
Very much so.
Get it. I will say this.
Listen, Juan, I'm watching this movie. And I felt a little embarrassed to be watching it. I'll put it that way. So, like I said, there's a lot of cringy humor, and it didn't work for me. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
Well, actually, no, I've already detailed a lot of what it is. But
if you were to choose one thing that just you wanted to hit pause and you didn't because we had to talk about it. It's like, is there one thing that made you go like, oh man, this is closing the border?
Let's see. Some of like the racial humor did not age particularly well. The whole the whole fook you, fook me thing. I was like, oof, this just is not, not really great.
We can't argue with that.
And the Godzilla thing too. Although Charmander made a quick cameo, I must note.
Shout out to the Mander. See, I think that's where we differ so much in opinion because, yes, those exist, but every other example of the humor that they do in this movie, I found that they took what they did in the second movie and just made it a little bit better. Like, yes, there's the fook me and the fook you, but they like one of my favorite jokes from this movie, and I've been thinking a lot about our first review as we're sitting here, and like there was that section of it, and please go have a listen to it on available in the archives if you haven't already. There was just a segment where we were just listing off jokes that I'm just laughing about them, and I could do that with this movie again. Like in the second movie, the Alan Parsons bit was pretty funny, but in this one where they do the whole, on the whole, Preparation H feels pretty good. Like that was freaking hilarious.
That's a Keith joke. That is a Keith joke.
Yeah. It's perfect. And then how they I'm really stuck on the whole scary movie thing because it does feel a lot like that with the whole like fat bastard and his wire team kind of breaking down the fourth wall.
That was
there.
one joke I did. I think the wire crew for Fat Bastard was one of the better jokes that they implemented.
My wire fighting team is ready.
Yeah, like that felt like something a little more fresh as opposed to they did the exact same like radar like spaceship penis joke that they did. I know they made a joke about it, but I'll just say as an example, right? There were times Austin Powers is good at like referencing itself for like already doing something to make a joke about it. I just don't think they executed as good as like a movie like 22 Jump Street, which I feel like mastered the whole art of doing a similar movie but making fun of yourself for it, but also being like your own thing. And I just don't think they executed in the same way.
No, and I think that's super valid. And at least for me, it's very interesting because 2000, we met in 2004, right? Like that's where the three of us first started talking. In
Yes.
2002, like I think like Keith said at the beginning of this podcast episode, I think I'm old enough there to not just watch a film, but I have a much more obvious preference of like what I'm looking for, right? And I think I went into this movie, and even when, like I mentioned it before we hit the record button, like Goldmember, whether you like the character or not, he's one of my more memorable personalities in film history, because for a long time I wouldn't say gold. I would say I want some gold, smoking a pancake and all of that stuff. Okay,
Shave
Ryan,
me
can you
from
please say
my
smoking a
shadow.
pancake? Come on,
No,
come on.
I'm not.
What, you won't say smoke at a pancake? You won't go with bong at a blitz? We
Come
can't
on,
get a
or
flapjack and a
smoking
cigarette out of you?
pancake. Come on, Ryan. give me one, Ryan. Just one. You're psychedelic, man.
That's
Damn it.
not gonna convince
Damn
me.
it, I tried.
No.
I tried.
Well, we
but
tried.
even though I mean, I love that in a movie where we have a character called Fat Bastard, which I don't think even that would happen. Goldmember is even just like going even farther as far as just like outrageous character, right? I mean, he's got a gold schlong. He's the whole like concept.
It is Vinky. He keeps the second key. It is Vinky.
See, like,
But-
keep this in the Goldmember game.
So to that point, I'm sitting here quoting Goldmember.
You're golding around, yeah.
Golden quote member? Was that what I was about to say? Okay, then sure, why not? I feel like Goldmember is another example of them just doing the second movie a little better than the third, because the same way that Fat Bastard was the quote machine in number 2, that's kind of the role that Goldmember fits in number 3, where it's more than just Michael Myers' new character, because when you think about all the iconic lines that are just constantly quoted from this movie, 90% of them come from Goldmember, really, and off screen right now, Ryan is just shaking his head in disgust at me. But you hate him. I loved the character just because it really was this fun quote machine of it's a very stupid parody of a James Bond villain.
Then it's possible that this movie just lives and dies on, did you like the Goldmember character, or did it just not?
I think
Is
totally.
it just not for you? You know what
Because
I mean?
that's
and
what that
it just
movie
didn't
is.
land for me. So maybe the rest of the movie kind of falls apart, because I feel like every character that was in other like previous Austin Power films is objectively worse in this movie than they were in other ones. And then the new characters are weak. You know, we have Foxy Cleopatra, who is
There's a whole
essentially
lot of woman.
she's a whole lot of nothing, unfortunately. I wish there could have been more to the character, but
Yeah, we
it
haven't
really
talked
just
about
wasn't.
one actor
Yeah,
that is
there's
in this film.
one very, very
Michael
weird
freaking
new
Caine is in
character.
this movie. Like that alone makes it the best Austin Powers movie, Ryan.
I don't think so.
You
I
don't like
really don't
Nigel?
think so. I
don't
do
like
I do like Michael Caine, but you know, he's fine. Like definitely not the worst, but yeah, I don't know.
But I think that is fair, that what you're saying, where a lot of this movie does live and die with Goldmember, kind of like how number 2, a lot of it really lives and dies with Fat Bastard, and if you enjoyed that character, where most of the quotable stuff came from. So if that didn't land for you, I can see why you hate this movie, because even though he's not the central plot, and he does kind of take like a back seat near the end of it, everything that happens does kind of revolve around Goldmember in this movie. Where
Like I don't
Go ahead.
hate it, but I would say it's objectively, well, not objectively, it's subjectively
Yeah.
the worst.
It's your opinion.
it's like-
objectively the
it's
worst.
the
easily-
most subjective on
It's
this
easily
podcast.
the worst. Like the gap between the second best and this one is much further than like the first and the second. Like, so
The one thing in this film that I got to knock it down some points for is the whole concept of Austin Powers is here's this spy detective guy from the past in future time, and then in every film he's still pretty much got to go back to the past, which hey is great for our podcast, right? But
Yeah.
it's so weird that they continue to go back, right? Like Foxy Cleopatra and him had a
I mean,
relationship.
they go to the 70s for like 3 minutes and then it's
which
back.
is just
Enough
weird.
to go to a disco club.
And I
Which
feel
is
like
all you
it
need
felt
of the 70s.
unnecessary. It really felt unnecessary, but
it really did. I do feel like Foxy Cleopatra and Goldmember could totally, like, you could have made a couple of different changes, right? And I think that would have worked. One thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we try to figure out, which is the best film overall or not. The first film, the chemistry with Austin Powers and the other characters was subjectively the best. Like, forget about the quality of the movie. I feel like the relationship, which the first one was the parody film. Like, that one should have been maybe like the worst or something. The second one was like super forgettable. I think here they almost had something, but the relationship is so superficial that it's like, why even go there, right? And I do feel like that's a little bit interesting. I do want to talk about Mini-Me and Scott, because even though Goldmember is such a big part of this film, the thing that I mentioned in the second one is that I would love for them to have done more, and they actually did. And I think even though it doesn't get a lot of time, I do love the fact that Scott is committed to be like, you know what? I'm going to be Dr. Evil's son. And from like losing hair to changing his hairstyle to the part of the scene where Dr. Evil wants him to sit, beside him, and he's like super excited, and Mini-Me gets the jealousy. For me, when I think about Austin Powers, I think these are the most memorable moments for me, because Mini-Me is such a great character, and then to see him be like heartbroken, like, oh, I don't like where this is going. I enjoyed that. What about you guys?
That was probably my favorite part of the movie, was the dynamic between Mini-Me and Mini-Me, Dr. Evil, and Scott. The fact that Scott is starting to kind of come around, and he gets the sharks with the laser beams, man. Like, how good is that? Yeah, I think that whole dynamic, and then Mini-Me has like a face turn. So
yeah,
that was probably the best part of the movie.
Yeah, it was the right decision, right? Because imagine flipping that and then they just had Scott turn a good guy. I don't think it would have been as memorable or anywhere near as good as doing it with Mini-Me. Plus, it's a nice change from the second movie, how they just flipped it upside down.
That's true. And it's like the little things in this movie where I don't think we've ever reviewed a film that is so obvious about the pop culture of its time. Like when they show the Osborne family, right? Like 2002,
that felt
man.
a little old.
Yeah,
that was
exactly.
It was right out of that time.
Yeah, because but at that point it was like super relevant, right? It's like the early 2000s, like that is thing, because it's like the next step of like reality shows where we went from nobodies in like the real world, right, to like now we have, hey, let's take these families of like recognized actors and people from bands and all that stuff. And I do think it's pretty cool that they did that before this became a thing. Like, I think in many ways, Goldmember is underrated as far as a lot of the groundwork that it laid for a lot of stuff. Like, you could take a lot of these elements and take it to like a Family Guy, like a Futurama, like a Scary Movie, and I feel like this movie really did popularize, a lot of this stuff. And what do you think about when they included Fat Bastard? He's in a very short time in the film. If you think about it, he's pretty much got the sumo scene. And then towards the end of the film, where he dropped a lot of that weight and all that. What did you think about that? And just to reiterate why I believe this was the last film, I think by them, I mean, they could have easily had him gain weight if they did like a fourth or something. But I think they knew, like, wouldn't it be funny if Fat Bastard lost all the weight? And they actually did that. But what do you think about him?
He was a very obvious case to me of the difference between writing the movie to tell the joke and or having the movie.
We can do it, man. We got you, fam.
This is
we got
hard.
you, fam.
Yeah, so the difference between writing the movie to tell the joke and then telling the joke and then like having the movie work around it, where they kind of had their points that they wanted to hit with Fat Bastard, and then they did the plot around it. Like, though I will admit, I love that wire fighting scene. I think everything around Fat Bastard, I was much less of a fan
They
of.
threw him into the movie.
They exactly. They threw him into the movie. Like, oh, they loved the toilet joke from the last movie, so now they need to do it again and go, oh, I didn't have any card, and just a bunch of silly stuff like that. And then getting their pop culture subway joke in with the at the end with him and the disgusting amount of gross skin.
I gotta ask a question, a hypothetical. You put yourself in Austin Powers' shoes, people. You're in that basket, that closed basket. All of a sudden, you get all of those lovely, sweaty sumo clothing just thrown right in your face. Ryan, how would you react if you were Austin Powers?
I would probably done the same thing he did and jumped out and probably got myself killed.
Yeah, it's not very shagadelic, so of course Ryan would have a bad reaction to it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is very true.
I will say, although I don't really care much for the character, I appreciated that they kind of wrote out Vanessa's character in the second movie, but they just were like, yep, Heather Graham never existed. Let's move on.
I think they probably realized, I mean, we talked about it and it was so obvious where she just didn't fit in the second film. I think Beyonce here, for example, did fit. I think it's like what you mentioned, though. It's a case of she was making a transition here, to acting and all that stuff. And you got to, I mean, look, we are big wrestling fans. You look at The Rock in his early acting career, the key word was potential, but the potential was not yet met. That took a little while. I feel like here, she had the personality and the vibe, but I don't think there was a lot of meat when it comes to that character that they could have really done a lot more of. And then the other part, and I brought it up a little bit earlier, is what do you think about the relationship between Nigel, Dr. Evil, and Austin, and the whole plot twist where, it's they were actually family, and it's reunited, and it feels so good. Keith, I feel like you give me, come on, you gotta be with me. That was pretty good, right? Give me something, Keith.
It was pretty funny at the end where the big revelation, it got to the point near the end where it's of course they're family, because why not? What other stupid thing are they gonna throw at us? But it was in a funny way where you just see Dr. Evil running and screaming like a little girl going, I'm Dougie, and it was hilarious. I loved that so much. And then my favorite joke of the movie happens right after that, where sometimes I will still randomly quote it to this day of, Dr. Evil, I used to think you were crazy, but now I can see you're nuts. Thank you.
Oh,
it's a great joke. That is a top shelf joke right there.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, man. This movie, it's just, just because now I know who my father is, so I'm no longer evil. Let's stop Goldmember now altogether. I know it's a comedy movie. It's not supposed to be taken seriously, but it just felt weak and very thrown in. The only thing I like that kind of comes of it is that at the end it's Scott is the next big evil character. So if they ever did do a fourth one, they have their new villain.
And to that point, that's why I didn't feel that this one was thrown in at all, because when you factor Scott into that whole plot of Dr. Evil turning good, okay, they're finally on the same page, they're finally getting along. Now Dr. Evil's going to be a good guy, and they even address it in the movie. I thought that was hilarious from the Dr. Evil Scott family line.
Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing, and we are also available on podcast feeds, so search the name, click on the Sword and Stone, and enjoy a brand new episode every single Sunday.